We've been working here in the old school museum for over 5 years on the mining history of the area. Last year we had funding and we built a model of the mining village of the Commons from the 1960s, and so it meant that we're multiple generations of people that were coming to view the village, but there were only people who were 50 years old or older that actually remembered the village as it was then, and they were talking to the younger generations. And then most of the younger generations also had a third generation, so we had grandparents, parents and children, and they came and looked at the village. And we started just with the models. We asked people who were around as children in the 60s to describe what the village was like. I then built the models and we put them on display. When they were looked at, they took on a whole new life. From being what Margaret described as the ghost village, they became reality for people. People were actually standing within the models, and we were fascinated by this. We never ever expected to get such a response to the model village. This year we applied for funding once again to build models, because we saw the great impact models can have on people. You can actually introduce them to a memory or to a space or a place without having to take them out. And where we are in Slieve Arda, we have the old mine sites that are dotted across a 4 or 5 mile area, in fields, in private land, difficult to access. So we said we would try and build a series of models based on the extant buildings, the bits of buildings that were left. And the original idea was to go and look at the Victorian ones and try and build them, and we were hoping we would have some surveys done of the buildings. And unfortunately, the Victorian buildings became less important to us, because having done the village project, we found the Gurteen Mine was from the same time, the same people were there, they had been working in it, and we were asking questions, not for the village project, but just around it, about when you arrived back in the village, how did you come here? We came back by bus. And then the story would go on to the bus coming from the mines and coming back. So we went down to Gurteen Mine with some of the miners and topside workers, and we asked them about what it was like physically and what their day was like. And from that, I kind of found that the dryness and historic value of the Victorian mines wasn't the same as looking at this huge site, an industrial site that was worked in by so many people. There were 300, 400 men working there. Whenever it closed, and supposedly more in the area, whenever the mines were running really well. So we started looking closer and closer at Gurteen, and there were more than 8 buildings in Gurteen. There were loads of buildings. There was offices, there was weighbridge, there were lamp houses, there was powder houses, which is where you keep the explosives. There was what they call the gantry, which in itself was the biggest building in existence in the mining area here. It's over 100 meters long, 100 meters long, and it housed all sorts of workings for the mines, and this was just on top of the mine. And up to now, having done projects on the mines for the area, I'd always asked and talked about miners and the men who went underground. And this year, we had men who were above the ground, and I realised that when the coal came up, there was a lot happened. And when the men were going down, there was a lot happened before they went underground. So this year our focus became on the top side of Gurteen, and my whole model building experience changed then, from working on the whole of the mine buildings in the area to do this one really important site.
Well, what I noticed about this project, the community up on top of Gurteen mines, they seem to be left aside in a certain way, because as far as I can see, the miners, it was kind of a bottom-up hierarchy. So if you were a miner, and you went down under, you were a braver man. There was kind of more prestige about it, whereas the boys on top weren't as courageous, and as a result didn't get paid as much either. So there was that difference there, But the community on top, it was like a whole different interaction. And they were the people who met all the others who came in, the lorry drivers from all the different companies who were coming to collect the coal. So there was a different relationship up there, different conversations even, different interaction with one another. But at the same time they were they were cleaner. So I don't know whether that inhibited them from even coming forth and talking about their experiences on top. So it's just that when we started on this, we were lucky enough that a lot of the miners that we were talking to were, particularly we've one in his 90s, and he was a top level worker, and they liked that acknowledgement, and then they liked the fact that it's their stories we were asking them, and they actually had, as you say, as Katy said there, they had more of a knowledge of what was on top. Whereas the miners came in on the bus, went down, came back up, into the showers and home. So they didn't really know about everything that went on top. And it was every bit as important, if not more important, than what was going on down underneath.
This was down here. Yeah. On the back of that, there seemed to be, from the photographs, from the ones that were taken from the coal yard up the top, there seemed to be a building behind the compressor shed. Something like that.
Yeah.
And then there seemed to also be a series of
Shelford or something.
protections.
7 tubs of water, it was, and 6 tubs of muck. I put the gas skip, Ballybuck, to go back out to Ballybuck, to run out from accident. One is to push and to go out to the car.
Yeah.
And Ballybuck will put the rope on the main rope and up you go.
Yeah.
And what was it? There was a small jumper that they filled the skip with. What did they fill the skip with?
So for me, I learned that they took credit for this, and they took pride in what was going on there, and even had that recorded, I think was great, because when you talk about mining, everybody talks about the miner and it's the underground and the hard work and that. The work was as hard on top. My father-in-law was working in the saw house there, and any of the other men will tell you that the men in the saw house were powerfully strong men. That the timbers they lifted, I mean, they did amazing work. The garage, I mean, they were definitely a community on themselves, into themselves. But it was great to have their stories recorded.
Now the importance, as Margaret would agree, is that we have the men that work there. We have the last opportunity to collect their stories, and we have the last opportunity to really find out what the place looked like without just looking at it as a derelict site with very few of the buildings left. And I built the models, and we had repeated consultations with groups of the men who worked both topside and below ground, and every time we produced a model we'd say, oh no, the winch was a bit higher, it was a bit further back, the landing was higher, the crank was steeper, and we just kept adjusting it. And it's still ongoing. I'm still working on the last model to try and get one that will work in the museum space here permanently. But it will get there, and we're still going back to them, and we're checking back with them what it looks like. So initially we built a full model of the landscape plus the buildings. Now we're remodelling them to make them into small areas within the mine site to allow us to see more accurately what the place looked like, and hopefully to gather more stories. The decision that we would work on the mine site as it looked, as it closed, because there is some footage from RTE from whenever it was closing, whenever the miners were talking to the television cameras, which is on websites. We were able to look at the buildings then. Also, anyone we were talking to was still working in the mine when it closed, so we had a good area there. But then, when we actually started talking to other men that had worked there, they remembered buildings being in different places, and some of the older miners, the older men who had worked there, had totally different views of it, because the buildings changed. It wasn't a static, permanent space. The lamp house moved, the clock house moved, the weighbridge moved, the winch was high up. People changed their ideas, and people didn't know where it was. Some men, one of the men said, "I never saw it that far. I never went round there," because he was going down. He'd come in and he'd go down underground and then he'd go home again. So everything was changed. So we found that every time we showed the model, somebody remembered something else. We stood beside the model for several days with a pen, just writing down notes on what was said and what was different. They had used small skips that held a ton of coal, which isn't that small, that would come up. Then the mines got this big 7-ton skip that would come up. And one of the miners said, "Oh, I remember, they put a gate up. There was a gate there in case it fell down again." And then 2 of the others turned around 2 minutes later and said, the gate only was there a week until they knew it wasn't going to slip back down the road. So these are the stories that we would never have got if we hadn't built the model and asked them to respond to it. So they're still responding to it.
It was lovely to see the miners when they came in and the interaction with the models. They stepped into the models. They stepped it back into Gurteen again. And what I found was really amazing is that a lot of these people left school when they were 13, 14, schools like this one here, and they never engaged in any arts. I mean, they never drew, they never had any opportunities to hear, anything about art. Whereas here they are, and they're in total awe and admiration of a piece of construction that, only that they saw it being produced, because Katy brought up, every time she did a piece, she'd show it to them, and they were building the models themselves. They were artists in a certain way, which for them to get to this stage of their lives and to be able to appreciate that and engage in it, I think was a big learning for us all.
It's our Heritage Week, and we said, as well as doing the tour of the mine sites, which has been really popular and very successful every year, and we've got special permission to go into the lands each year to go to it, we said we'd have the dance in the column, which is also very, very popular, because that's about making the homemade coal column balls for use in the fireplaces. And then we discussed the column balls, and we said, wouldn't it be lovely to make a kitchen? Well, somebody said, wouldn't it be lovely to make a kitchen? A miner's kitchen from the 20th century. Because once again, we couldn't tie it down to any particular time, because some people had one thing and some people didn't. So we had our column balls, or the plan for our column balls, and we discussed what the fire looked like. And one of our ex-miners, topside men, offered to build us the grate and the crane. We started with that, and then we built the kitchen around that. We got boards made up the shape of the kitchen, the shape of the fireplace. We built up what a wall would look like and papered it, and then populated the kitchen with objects from the mid-20th century. So we had a full miner's kitchen built downstairs, and it was brilliant. It gave a whole community space within this community space that was new, it was unique, and totally immersive. People came in, instead of looking at a small model, they were in a large model, but then in their heads they were actually back in the mine kitchen and looking at stuff from the mid-20th century. And the younger children come in, and we still have the model up. They backed the kind of wall of the mine up, and they come in and they practice their Irish dancing and doing their music lessons ever against it. But they spend a lot of time looking at it and discussing it too, and we're just enjoying seeing it.
It was great when people, as you said, that's another lived experience. They walked in and they were whoa back there. Small children came in. I know the first time one little one came in to do her music, and she looked, and her first reaction was, "Is it real?" And she was totally, she spent the night looking up at it and watching this. And it was lovely, because there was the older generation were there, and they remembered, bits and bobs, and we were very lucky with even the items that we got. They were loaned to us. Some came out of kitchens, and one daughter said, "I can remember those two on our mantelpiece at home." And she said when the light would go out, she said they'd light up, but she said the memories of just having the light from the lamp and the stories that were told and really evoked for her. They were their lamps, and she She was so proud just to see the lamps up there. We had so many bits and bobs, and it, again, evoked an awful lot of memories for a lot of people, different ones. So it was kind of a trip back in time to remember, and it was lovely because it was recognition of where they had come from too, and how simple life was, and yet everybody had enough. And it was. I mean, if we could have taken in the offers that we got during the week, we'll say at Heritage Day, we could have had the whole room full of artefacts from people's houses that they still have, but they don't know what to do with them. So we'll say what we did for that is we kind of built up that lived memory, so it was a step back in time, really, wasn't it? And it was lovely because we had a music session then. The night before, we were paying tribute to one of our musicians from the area, an ex-miner again. And the minute he came in, it was a down your way, it was a radio program. The minute Harry came in, he sat into the chair at the side of the fire as if he was back there, you know, and it was all that. And to have the music playing, we'll say, in the kitchen, it was kind of very much like what would have gone on years ago here, because, as you know, and in most places, you had the musicians, they were called in, and we nearly had the flag floor, we could have had, and it was all that, the fire, the column balls, we had the kettle on, we had the kettle actually on, and you know, it was all the interaction and people chatting afterwards and people just mixing with one another, neighbours in, and that's what that night was. It was a very homely night, and everybody sat in, kind of felt, okay, you know, this is like being back there again. And just like the village one, as Katy said, when people came in and felt, I'm back there again. And I suppose if we've done nothing else, we've helped people, we've helped those memories, you know, be evoked, we'll say, for these people. And I think that's heritage to me.
This year we made an emphasis to try and record in writing any of the stories we were told, and one of the local men has taken on board to keep doing this. He's interviewing miners, ex-miners, miners' families, anybody who has been involved, and we're gathering these stories. And as part of this gathering of stories and of the literary end of looking at the mines, we invited the Slieve Arda's writers group in to the exhibition whenever we had it up. Just after Heritage Week, some of them had visited during Heritage Week. They came back as a group, and naturally enough, because they live in this area, they had poems about the mines that they had written already. And we had a lovely evening with them downstairs where they recited the poems that they had, and we're hoping they've taken on board to write some more poems about the past and the mines in the area. They were really interested in what was going on here. Now, most of them have been here before, but to put their talents into it is something we're really pleased with this year, and also to get the written memories is a big step forward.
It was always an oral tradition to pass on a story orally, but what we are trying to achieve, and I think are achieving, is that we're providing a visual for some people who may not have the visual, and in particular, it's really, really important that we're giving children a baseline as to what the older generation were talking about, because a lot of the objects and a lot of things that were happening at the time, they can't visualise it. So this is actually giving them some little starting point that they can even connect to. That's what energises us to actually stay going and to continue doing what we do.
This is now our method of working. If we provide the time for people to tell us the stories, and we listen to the stories, and we produce work from the stories, written pieces, and then the models, people then tell us more stories. And this is how we're gathering our history. And for as long as we have the miners and the people who remember the mines in the area, we will get the stories, and we will use the visuals to help get more stories.
We never even realised it.